You guys have been having fun drinking while learning? Awesome. If I haven't thanked you already twice today, I'll thank you a third time for coming to Tales on Tour Mexico. It's part of my script, so I have to. Thanks again, and sincerely, Ann and I and the team, I can't tell you how much we appreciate everybody showing up. And I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Hendrick's Gin from William Grant and Sons. You know, these guys, none of this would be possible without those guys. And so we really appreciate it. Anybody go to their party last night? That was pretty epic stuff, huh? You can always count on William and Grant for like a blow-it-out party. One of these days I'm going to get invited to one of those ideation sessions when they come up with those ideas. So a couple of things. If you haven't already, please download the Tales on Tour Mexico City app. It's really cool. Not only does it have the schedule in there and all that other stuff, and you can connect through social media, but you can rate the seminars in real time, and it gives our presenters a lot of really good feedback. If you haven't already, don't forget the pop-up store for the unique spirits and the Bitter Sling Bitters is open until 6, but I believe they're going to stay open till 7. So make sure you do that. And this actually was going to be Let Gin Open Your Mind session, but bartenders, I don't know what to say. We're actually going to look for them. So if you all would just sit tight for a few moments, and when I find them, we'll get this session started. Thanks.
Shuffle when you hear in your minds and with your noses and your taste. Have you got that, translators? Good afternoon, good evening. Before we begin properly, I would like you all to find, in a short period of time, a space inside your mind that is where your dreams come from. It's also where your tastes come from. And vision and image and taste are going to be interlinked in a nonsensical fashion. But the most important is that you yourselves are making the creative links, and you are creating what happens here today. So we bless you from the bottom of our bottles. And now we may begin. Now we may begin.
Hey, David. Good to see you. Hi, everybody. Hello, Mexico City. Muy buenas tardes. Good afternoon. I'm going to do my presentation. I'm going to speak in Spanish because I'm a Mexican and I'm very proud and I want to say this in my language. So, bienvenidos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Mi nombre es Joseph Mortera y tengo la fortuna de estar con estos dos grandes personajes del mundo de la ginebra y del mundo. David Piper, nuestro embajador global de Hendrick, y Jim Ryan, nuestro senior ambassador en Estados Unidos. También me gustaría, obviamente, agradecer a Tales of the Cocktail, a Paul, a Anne y a todos los CAPs que han hecho esto posible. Es una pequeña introducción, es únicamente para agradecerles y para agradecerles, obviamente, a todos ustedes por estar aquí. Esta tarde todos tenemos algunos temas en especial. Yo voy a hablar mucho de los sueños y de cómo el bar y cómo la ginebra de alguna manera me ha abierto la mente y ha ayudado a que a través de la ginebra pueda abrir la mente de muchísimas otras personas, ¿no? Voy a pasar el micrófono a David and James.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. Cool. So yes, as Joseph mentioned, I'm National Ambassador to Hendrick's Gin in the U.S., and we wanted to just give a little bit of a snapshot of an eye-opening gin experience. And mine goes back about just over 10 years now. And there was a bar that had opened up in the West Village on a generally fairly sketchy street that was, up until that point, and still a little bit populated by ladies of the night, transvestites, and punk kids. And it was on Hudson and around West 10th. And I was in between. I hadn't jumped full force into this industry, and the bar had just opened. I was working at a fine dining restaurant and kind of in between worlds personally. And I remember my first encounter at this bar. I was greeted by the bartender who was dressed in a sharp white jacket. I could smell the citrus fruit that I knew was fresh that had just been juiced that day. And I was lucky enough to get a spot at what's known as the Point. And the Point is where all the action is if you're an aspiring bartender and you want to see a true show person hold court. And the Point is a little rounded off at this bar. Some of you in this room I know have been there. I've been there with a few of you, in fact. And you can really get a look into what that bartender that's working Point is doing, and it's magnificent. Of course, if you really want to figure out what's going on at a bar, you tuck your head in at the service station and really follow closely. But I was at Point, and I had no idea what to order. The bartender, this bar was employees only, and the bartender made a gin cocktail for me, and I was just coming into gin at the time, and it blew my mind, and it opened up a world to me that not only embraced bartending and cocktailing, mixology, but this magnificent category of gin that, well, I'm now fortunate enough to say that I have an opportunity to talk in front of you all about. But yeah, that's my sort of like first clue into this magical spirit. David, what have you got?
So I'm going to lead things off. First of all, just a little note on the images. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things today. And you might not remember all of it. You might not understand what we're saying, not because it's particularly clever, just because there's a lot of bonkers nonsense that's going to come out of our mouths. And just like the images, if some of them stick in your mind, then we'll feel like we've done a good job. Some of them might completely by coincidence correspond to something that we're saying, but they're pretty irrelevant. I just hope that they can help take you a little bit further into a state which I often find when I'm sat on my own normally at the bar in an establishment that has the right balance between comfort, friendliness, the right music, the right lighting. The kind of bars that you walk into and you feel comfortable even before you've taken your coat off. You know, as you step into the door, your shoulders start to relax, and you're getting yourself, without even necessarily thinking about it, into the right state to have that first gin martini. And that first dry martini can work wonders. Through taste being a deep, ancient instinct, which is linked much, much more to emotion and memory and subconscious, and the place where dreams come from, and the imagination, than it is at all to words. Very hard to describe taste, unless I think you're going to go at it through a roundabout, poetical way. And through a gin martini, through a good Hendrick's martini, I can often find myself traveling. And I think the planet that has the strongest influence on martinis is the moon. So, now I'm trying to remember which story I should tell you. I took a little trip with our master distiller, Leslie Gracie, an incredible woman, to Venezuela, into the middle of the jungle with this incredible Venezuelan explorer, Charles Brewer Carrias, 78 years old and stronger than any of you in this room. And he took us to stay with a tribe of Indians for 10 days looking for their plants. They were taking us to see their plants that they used for medicine and magic. He said basically, you know, so you guys, you use plants for flavor. You've got to come to my back garden. Charles calls the whole Venezuelan forest his back garden. You've got to come and you will discover flavors that you have never tasted before. You just can't imagine. There is a flavor equivalent to every single one of these images, by the way. And when we were there, on the first day, we were sitting down with the Indians, and they were telling us about some of the plants they might take us to see. And they would say, it's a tree, we use the bark, it's very bitter. It's a flower, it's a fruit, it's quite sweet. But they weren't giving us much more information than that. And one of them, for some reason, sort of sparked Leslie's fancy, and she asked, what does it taste like? And the Indians sort of scratched their heads and looked at each other and said, well, it's a weird question. It tastes like itself. And they got no other way for describing taste. What does a cucumber taste like? Cucumbers. So while I was there, one night, it was a full moon, and the night before, I'd seen a big white halo around the moon. Big white ring. I've seen that before, but it's very, very sort of strong and special. But this next night was the night that I made martinis for all the people in the tribe. We brought a little ice machine, and taking ice to the equatorial rainforest was in itself quite interesting, something that they'd never seen. But that night, the moon was surrounded by a rainbow. There was a rainbow, a full circle, shining out of the moon. And in its purity, in its crystalness, in its coldness, the round surface of the martini reflects the light of the moon and takes energy from it and takes us down mystical paths. I'll stop there and hand back over to Joseph, who might be able to bring us back to some more solid reality. I'm not sure, but more later.
Bueno, yo ahora quisiera hablar sobre una experiencia de cómo fue que la ginebra me fue cambiando un poco la vida en general, ¿no? Un poco de mi historia, yo empecé a trabajar detrás de barras como ayudante, barback, en mi primer año de preparatoria, ya hace algún tiempo. Hasta que terminé la universidad, yo estudié filosofía y durante la preparatoria me llegó un libro muy especial que seguramente muchos conocen, que es de Carlos Castañeda, que se llama Las enseñanzas de Don Juan. ¿Alguien lo ha leído? Cool. Hay una parte muy interesante que me cambió mucho la vida y que va mucho con la idea de la ginebra y me gustaría compartírsela. Hay un periodo que él dice que los chamanes desarrollan un superpoder, por así decirlo, que les crecen tentáculos del ombligo y que esos tentáculos coquetean con los tentáculos de todos. Los míos ahora están tal vez coqueteando con los de David y con los de Jim. Son unos tentáculos totalmente transparentes, pero son energía que nosotros podemos extraer por medio de estos tentáculos. Cuando yo leí este libro, que fue en la preparatoria, yo ya trabajaba en barras y, siéndoles sinceros, me fue cambiando mucho la vida porque dije, ¿cómo puedo yo desarrollar esto o cómo me puedo beneficiar de estos pulpos? Yo no sé si esto sea cierto, pero yo empecé a trabajar en desarrollar esa habilidad, ¿no? Ese superpoder. Estando en la barra, te podía practicar todo el tiempo y podías ser súper sensible con nuestros clientes, con nuestros bebensales que llegaban, y yo a través de estos tentáculos poder saber cómo viene el cliente, ¿no? ¿Qué le vas a ofrecer? Y siempre encontré un gran alivio en la ginebra en general al servir un buen martini, ¿no? Estos tentáculos te dicen cómo viene tu cliente y cómo bien lo puedes sacar, ¿no? Hablando con muchos clientes y siguiendo con el tiempo, creo que he desarrollado muy bien esta habilidad o este superpoder, y creo que todos y cada uno de los bartenders lo tienen, porque somos unas personas que son muy sensibles a sentir esta energía de las demás personas, ¿no? La ginebra, para mí, como bien decía David, siempre he visto los destilados como los divido por género, más que materias primas, los divido por si son chicos o chicas, ¿no? Imagínense el mezcal, que es el producto de la energía del sol, ¿no? Es un dios de energía, es un dios poderoso, que nos tomamos la energía de por lo menos 7 años, ¿no? De energía es la que consumimos en un mezcal. Por eso nos da energía, y es un trago para guerreros, y obtenemos esta energía del piso, ¿no? A través del agave. Yo pondría a la ginebra como una chica muy seductora, ¿no? Una ginebra bien balanceada es como una chica perfecta, ¿no? Voy a dejar aquí esta idea en el aire y voy a pasar con Jim. Jim, what do you got?
Right. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, David. Thank you. Yeah. So when we were breaking this up, I wanted to focus, just take the bit of the magic that we started off with and sort of continue it as we get into this particular spirit, Hendrick's gin. I wanted to focus on the botanicals, and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. And I've spoken to botanicals, and there's sort of, fun facts about them, but I wanted to just share some just amazing medical and magical stories that I uncovered as I was doing just a little bit of research. Just so you know, there's an ancient burial site in northern Iraq. It's about 60,000 years old. It's a Neanderthal burial site, and there's one particular dead body, super ancient, that happens to have 8 different botanicals surrounding him, and one of them we're actually going to touch on today. But this gentleman, it's most likely that this gentleman, who's between the ages of 30 and 35, was a shaman. He was a healer. He had connections to other worlds, other dimensions, and people in his tribe relied on him. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the stuff that I'm going to talk about now is really old. Yes, we have advances in modern medicine, and I am eternally grateful for that. But I think it's important to take a step back Perhaps in some of these cases, there'll be 13 instances way, way back. So the way that I'm going to talk about Hendrick's gin is I'll talk about the top, the middle, and the bottom notes. I'll talk about the floral notes in Hendrick's. Then we'll get into some fruitier and spicier notes, and then we'll get into the roots. And then finally, I'll wrap things up with what really differentiates Hendrick's gin out from anything else, to be honest. So I'll tell a few stories along the way. This is my good friend chamomile. So raise your hand if you've never heard of chamomile. Right, that's what I thought. So it has a ton of magical attributes. It's associated with the sun, with Leo, the element water. It's known to help cleanse and invigorate the throat chakra, which is the 5th chakra. It's associated with various sun gods, including Ra, Cernunnos, which is a Celtic god, sun god, and then there's another Celtic sun god there, Luch. Quite impressive beings, the Celtic ones. They've got these horns that they're just dominate their bodies. Cool, thank you. So if you could wash your hands in chamomile water before gambling, supposedly it'll increase your luck. You can add it to sachets or put it in your wallet so that money will somehow magically come to your wallet. I just figured that one out. I'm going to tuck some chamomile away in my wallet from here on out. In meditation, it's often used as an incense. So that's just a bit on chamomile. Now we're getting into some heavy stuff here. Elderflower is like wicked. It's so dense and vast when you're talking about its magical properties and purposes and uses. Traditionally, the elder tree was known as a witch's tree. And even today, there's actually a real reluctance of any country folk that have to cut it down. If they're traditionalists, they'll kneel and they'll actually say this to the elder tree. Lady Elderhorn, give me of thy wood, and I will give thee of mine when I become a tree. Pretty wild. So it's thought to guard off thunderbolts and plagues. If it was planted next to bakehouses for prevention of stopping the devil from actually being folded into the dough as you were making bread, and it's actually why you'll often see a cross on a loaf of bread, because they're warding off the devil from actually getting into the bread. Twigs of elder were woven into Beltane head. If you sit under an elder tree on a midsummer's day, you may happen to see some fairies floating around, and if you summon them by blowing a wooden elder flute. They can be used magically to relieve heavy emotional state, or if you feel like you're stuck in a situation of mind. They can magically help with anxieties and fear. It can be used to stimulate joy and aid recovery. A couple points just getting into like New Testament stuff. So, pretty much within the same like couple of days, Jesus was actually crucified on an elder branch, and Judas of Iscariot hung himself on an elder branch, on an elder tree. It's pretty wild stuff, elder. Cool. So yarrow. I'm just going to give some other names for this. I've been sort of towing lightly, but I'm just going to give a laundry list of names, of aliases for this hallowed botanical. All heal, angel flower, bad man's plaything, bloodwort, cammock, carpenter's weed, devil's nettle, devil's plaything, dog daisy, green arrow, old man's mustard, old man's pepper, soldier's woundwort, which is very key, squirrel's tail, stanch grass, stanch weed, thousand leaf, thousand weed, woundwort, and yarrow way. The history and folklore of yarrow is pretty magnificent. So in the Trojan War, the hero Achilles was taught by a centaur to use yarrow to heal the wounds of his soldiers. And for centuries, soldiers carried yarrow on their person for that very reason. One story says the plant actually grew from a rust that scraped from his spear. The botanical's name in Latin actually translates as Achilles' thousand-leafed herb. It has a reputation in Asia, and it's actually said to grow on the grave of Confucius. During the Middle Ages, it was supposed to assist in both summoning the devil and driving him away, which I find a little odd. And it was used in complicated Christian exorcism rites. It has tons of magical attributes. So this image over here, so this is Achilles' mother who dunked him in the river Styx, but she actually kept his heels out of the water for fear of him drowning. And we all know what happened to Achilles, right? Well, that's why. It's quite impressive. If you hang a bunch of yarrow over the bed on a wedding night, it's supposed to ensure a lasting love for 7 years for those of you single people or those of you that happen to be engaged. If you add it to bouquets or garlands worn by a bride or groom, the same effect is supposed to happen. There's a lot of old sort of rhymes on yarrow, too. So here's a rather dark one. And this is a case where the yarrow is supposed to be plucked from the grave of a man who happened to die unfortunately young. Yarrow, sweet yarrow, the first that I have found. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pluck it from the ground. And Jesus loved sweet Mary and took her for his dear. So in a dream this night, I hope my true love will appear. I mean, whoa. Yeah, jump in.
It's just that yarrow's one of my favorite ones to talk about. For all the other things, in China they use the stalks for the I Ching. Mm-hmm. But in Scotland, the Western Isles of Scotland, which you can see from the Hendrick's distillery in Girvan, they used to believe that yarrow leaves, if you put them over your eyes, would give you second sight.
Yeah.
So we're not saying that if you drink enough Hendrick's, it'll turn you psychic. Just, you're free to experiment yourselves.
Déjenme para hacer una pausa y decirles lo que están tomando ahora. Este es un cóctel más tipo ponche que lleva un poco de Hendrick's Gin, lleva un jarabe de manzanilla de la que estábamos hablando hace un par de minutos, Lillet Blanc y agua saborizada con pepino. Básicamente cortamos pepino en agua y la dejamos un par de horas para que tenga ese sabor y es todo lo que lleva. Espero que les haya gustado. Sorry, Jimmy.
Oh, by the way, if you're lucky enough, you do have a chamomile button to throw in your wallet.
Yeah, we're all rich.
So Juniper, our dear friend Juniper, we get the name gin from it, and every gin has it. Hendrick's is certainly no exception. If it hasn't, all of these plants have elements, and I'll talk about some of the elements that they have, but it's a fire-elemented botanical, and it has its planetary association would be Jupiter, which kind of sounds like juniper. It's always been known as a protective herb, and specifically to guard against theft. So wearing a sprig of juniper is believed to protect the wearer from accidents and wild animal attacks. If you hang it at your door, it's said to protect from you and your home from evil forces, evil people, ghosts, and sickness. So I have these two witches over here because one of the first stories that I found on juniper was if you plant a juniper bush outside of your door, it will ward off witches from entering your door and doing whatever bad witches do to you. Unless, of course, the witch can count every single needle on the bush. Then they can do whatever the hell they want to do, I suppose. I don't know. It's often used for manifestation, for incense, for smudges, and rituals of purification. A lot of purifying people, for example, baby blessing ceremonies, initiations. A small bunch of twigs or a few berries in a pouch can also be hung in the rafters of a building or over a doorway as a longer-term protection. So there's a lot of folklore about juniper that actually comes from Iceland, where it was traditionally believed that juniper and rowan, which is another tree, could not grow together because each creates so much heat that one or the other of the trees would burn the other one up. So for the same reason, in Iceland, it's considered not such a good idea to bring sprigs of both woods into the house together unless you particularly wanted your house to burn down. Another Icelandic belief was that if you're building a boat, you must either use both juniper and rowan wood or use neither of them in a boat, or it will just sink. According to some paleoethnobotanists, juniper has been our closest magical plant ally since Neolithic times. And it was already mentioned in ancient Egyptian texts. Its fragrant wood, needles, and berries were used in incense and medicine since time old. And it's really said to ward off all evil. It's a purification plant in par excellence. It can be used to cleanse ritual spaces or magical tools, strongly dispel negative energies and entities. It's often used in incense healing rites. And during meditation, it actually helps to focus and helps in concentration. It can be used in a lot of rites of passage. Coriander. It's a masculine botanical as well, and its planet is Mars. It's a fire symbol. Love, health, and healing. It's used in love satchels and spells, and if you add the powdered seeds to warm wine, supposedly you can make a warm lust potion. Protects gardeners and all their households. The seeds are reportedly able to promote peace between people who just aren't able to get along. It's used in drinks or crushed in incense, and supposedly it also will help one find romance. And it's an excellent herb to add as an elixir when the great rite between two is celebrated. Cubeb. Moving on to some spice. You'll see there, it was actually used as a cigarette flavoring agent. Comes from Indonesia, the tailed pepper. Down below, there's an image. It's a little yellowed out, but there's an incubus, or a demon, that's actually attacking that woman. And the cubeb was actually used in ancient Christian rituals to ward off the incubus from attacking. I hope an incubus never attacks me. Really just... A succubus I'll take. The succubus is the female version of an incubus, in case you're wondering. I think I've met a couple succubi in my time. Thank you, Louis. Caraway. It's masculine as well. It's an air symbol. Protection, lust, health, anti-theft, mental powers. Its magical uses are fidelity, love, memory, passion, preventing theft, protection, retention, sensuality, consecration, fertility, grain, honesty, keeping secrets, peace of minds, and it's often used at wedding ceremonies too. It's often placed in dream pillows to help you remember your dreams. If you stow caraway seed in a small white bag with thread and hide it under the mattress of a child's crib, supposedly it will keep the child free of illness. It's often used in love potions to keep lovers from being unfaithful. Orange peel. Its zodiac sign is a Leo. Its gender is male, and its planet is the sun. Its element is certainly fire, then. Its basic powers are luck, love, money, divination, and it's also used at weddings, too. Dried orange peel and seeds are often added to love sachets for magic, and the flowers of those sachets are designated to lead to wedding bliss. One of my favorite stories on orange peel. So here's one for you. To glean the answers to a yes or no question, eat an orange. If the count, then you're supposed to count the number of seeds in your orange. If it's an even number, the answer is no. If it's an odd number, the answer is yes. Just to simplify any of your life problems that you may have. It's all in the orange. So lemon peel. The orange told me to do it. It's associated with lunar deities. So the orange is the sun, the lemon is the moon, right? Which is including Thoth, which is the Egyptian moon god of wisdom. Its magical attributes: cleansing, spiritual opening, purification, removal of blockages. It's often added to the peel is often added to sachets and mixtures. Yeah, lemon. Not so much on lemon. Orris. From ancient times, so the orris is actually, for those of you that aren't aware, this is actually the root of the iris plant. So for ancient times, the stately iris stood as a symbol of power and majesty. It was dedicated to Juno and was the origin of the scepter. So the Egyptians actually placed it on the brow of the Sphinx and on the scepter of their kings. The three leaves of the iris, the blossoms rather, are typifying faith, wisdom, and valor. Its medicinal action and uses: the juice of the fresh roots is often mixed with a wine and has been employed it offers a strong purge for great efficiency in dropsy, especially in children. That's probably because they're drinking the wine. Angelica. So the medical attributes of Angelica are associated with the angels. Angelica, angels, Michael and Gabriel. It's aligned with the sun and the element of fire and is also sacred to Venus. It's commonly used for general protection, especially against evil spirits, and its hex-breaking skills are renowned. You can grow Angelica on your property to protect your garden and your home. Angelica root can be carried alone or added to amulets to increase the longevity and ward off illness and evil spirits. If you keep Angelica in a white bag, it will supposedly protect your baby. Smoking the leaves of Angelica is said to increase clairvoyance and increase your visions. It's an excellent incense in exorcisms, healing, and protection. The cucumber. Its associations are the moon, the element water. It's known for chastity, fertility, and healing. For a fertility spell, keep a cucumber in your bedroom and replace it every 7 days. That's right. It's also said, I have no idea. I mean, just look at it. It's a cucumber. It's also said that a cucumber peel, if bound around the head, will actually cure a headache. For those of you that may have a good night tonight, be needing a cucumber around your head tomorrow morning. So here's a little rhyme that I found on the cucumber and its healing attributes. Did you ever wonder about the cucumber? If you're ever in a pickle, they can come in handy. Even if you're fickle, your taste, it'll tickle. Make haste and don't waste. The skin, take it all in. Now there's a quandary. Question: what happens if you slumber with a cucumber? Answer: you'll throw a swell fertility spell. For crying out loud, what's a salad without one? The wonder of the cucumber, fiber-packed with its own canteen. The wonders of the cucumber, luckily stacked with vitamins A and C. While still having room for calcium. The wonder of the cucumber. Did you know the silica will help you glow? The wonder of the cucumber. Go ahead, there's nothing to dread. Help vanquish skin blemish and serve a dish. Be cool as a cucumber. If you remember, it'll help cure high blood pressure. The wonder of the cucumber. May your life endure. And finally, thank you. It's a bit of a modern poem. The rose. Roses have been cultivated for over 5,000 years. There are about 150 natural name species worldwide. And they really vary from different cultures. So in the Iliad, Homer mentions that Hector's body was anointed with rose oil from our dear friend Achilles after he killed him. Let's see, what else have we got? They're important in Roman culture. Large public rose gardens were established by the nobility. In Christian folklore, the red rose in particular, has symbolized the blood and suffering of Christ. The 5 petals representing his 5 wounds. Roses have often been used to represent Mary and the purity of motherhood associated with her. And finally, in Muslim folklore, one of Muhammad's wives was accused of adultery. So he gave her a bouquet of red roses and told her to throw them into a pool. They turned yellow, indicating her of guilt. Another story says that the first rose came a drop of sweat from Muhammad's brow. One more for you. In Jewish folklore, a man once accused a woman of a crime in retribution for refusing his advances. She was to be burned at the stake, as would happen. Miraculously, the fire did not kill her, but killed him. And from his ashes, red roses grew, symbolizing his treachery. From the ashes at her feet grew white roses, symbolizing her innocence. In England, if a petal falls as a rose is being cut, bad luck is sure to follow, apparently. And then finally, in Italy, only rosebuds or particularly closed roses may be given as gifts. To give a fully open rose to another marks them for death. So there you have, in a nutshell, all the bits and pieces, the botanicals, the flowers, fruits, seeds, and roots that are steeped in thousands upon thousands of years of history. Like David alluded to, I can't get in front of you and say that drinking this is good for you. I just can't. But if it happens to put a smile on your face, enhance your visions, give you better dreams, perhaps give a clue into another dimension, so be it. That's all I've got for you.
Back to some nonsense. Thanks so much, Jim. That was full of brilliant, lovely stuff. And as Jim was saying, a large part of culture around alcohol is to do with storytelling. And actually, going back to the trip I took to the jungle, they have their own fermented brew. It's made from manioc roots. They find another leaf from another plant covered in wild yeast, leave it out there in the sun, and they have like a 3 or 4% quite like tangy cider kind of stuff. And they drink it in two ways, with all the bits in. So it's like a alcoholic porridge, like a cider porridge, if you can imagine that. And they drink it in that way to give them strength. If they're hollowing out a canoe all day, if they're working in the field, that's what they'll drink. But the other way they drink it is filtered and clear. And then it has very special ceremonial purposes. When somebody is returned to the village from a trip away, or on particular occasions in their calendar, everybody gathers in the main central hut. They have various processions, various feather headdresses being worn, there's all sorts of stuff going on in the ceremony, but everybody is dead silent. Then they eat some frog's leg soup, and then the first person who's going to talk takes a drink, and then he can start telling the stories. And when I was there, in this sort of hundreds, thousands of miles from anywhere, from the modern world that I know, with these people who live in a very, very different way. I mean, they have incredible technology to do with plants and an incredible worldview. And for me to discover that the way they use alcohol is to gather people together and tell stories and produce images in their mind made me feel really, really happy. Because I guess it's sort of what I try and do. And it always reminds me of the Greek concept, the ancient Greek concept of virtuous drinking, which was sort of an almost formalized way of getting together with friends and into the wine, projecting your own imagination and letting the taste, letting the play of these sort of subtle sensations into your nose and over your palate and over your tongue put you in touch with a sort of, your emotional, subconscious, instinctive, dreamlike, and imaginative place. And you get everything right in a bar, you get the cocktail right, you get the company, the warmth, and that can start to happen. Which is why we're so keen on telling all these stories, that aren't flavors. And that's not why Leslie Gracie used those botanicals to create Hendricks. It was sort of, well, we must have more protection from witches and a bit more fertility. It has nothing to do with the flavors, but at the same time, we're so influenced when we taste by atmosphere and what's going on and by stories. So I think they're very, very important. And they're also quite fun, and that sometimes gets left out.
So this is a drink here called the Melodious Melonade. It's got Hendrick's gin in it. Go figure. A rooibos melon tea that I purchased online. Delicious. It's extremely fragrant. It just healthily reeks of melon. It's so good. A little bit of just squeezed melon juice and a little bit of fresh lemon juice. A touch of simple syrup. This is a drink that I could crush all afternoon long. And I figured in the warm climate that we've got here, it'd be something to share with you all. So, cheers.
Salud. Cheers. So I'm going to take us back a little bit to some of the roots of distillation and distilled spirits, and then the uses of herbs, botanicals. And for me, I find it very, very interesting that distillation was such an important part of the alchemical process. The European alchemists of the Middle Ages, who were, in one sense, they were searching for how to make gold. But in many, many other senses, what they were searching for were actually much greater secrets to unlocking existence, the universe, mystery and spirit, using physical materials and working out how to play with them. And distillation was a huge, incredibly important part of that process. Aqua vitae, the water of life, is what they first called spirits. And it was a miraculous thing. It was cold and wet, like water, but in your mouth, it was also hot and dry. So it was the four elements: water, earth, air, and fire, which combined into one thing is pretty incredible. On top of that, it then has the ability to carry over medicinal and flavor properties of plants far, far, far better than water does. And throughout the history of sort of medicines, you find many, many occasions when the key to unlocking a plant's medicinal use is just by steeping it in alcohol. Quinine is a very, very good example of that. It works much, much, much better when you dissolve it in alcohol. So this alchemical idea of this sort of magical spirit that also magically carried over the flavors and the parts of plants that really do good things to you is sometimes sort of, is how I feel the roots of what we do today have come about. I don't want to stress the alchemy sort of metaphor too far, although you could. I think it's a sort of a very, very mysterious, strange thing that they were doing that I don't particularly understand very well. And I think that was the point, in fact. It was to be in a state of mind where one thing is a metaphor for something else, where things have symbols and connections, and this whole world has huge amounts of connections between things and properties and ideas. Yeah, I don't want to push that point too much. But at the same time, spirits, aqua vitae, the water of life, can get into your brain and make some strange connections. And I think that's very, very useful. It took a little while, though, for people to realize that this stuff that they were drinking when they felt bad, that they would be sort of prescribed by a doctor, a physician. Well, yeah, if you were bad and you drank it, it made you feel better. But actually, if you felt all right and you drank it, it made you feel better as well. So it wasn't really until about the 15th century that spirits were begun to be being drunk for pleasure. And it started slowly. And it started in Holland with juniper, with Geneva, which, as Jim mentioned, has been used medicinally for thousands and thousands of years. It was used by the ancient Greeks, by the athletes. They'd pop the juniper berries as go-faster pills. So pretty much exactly the same thing that athletes do today. The Roman gladiators used it in the plagues that kind of decimated medieval Europe. The long-beaked masks that ours are almost like were originally used stuffed with juniper berries and twigs and leaves as the very first gas masks. I'm getting distracted by my own... Ignore the slideshow. It's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about. What can I do? So, looking back through our cucumber-shaped telescope, through time, we get to Holland in the 15th and 16th centuries, where Geneva spirit, which was burnt wine, quite kind of rye heavy, was beginning to be drunk quite a lot. And the Dutch were, at that time, spreading out an empire over the world and finding exotic, interesting new plants and botanicals. It didn't really come to London for a little while. The English encountered it when they sent soldiers over to fight in the 30 Years' War. And in fact, that's where we get the phrase Dutch courage from. Stop distracting me. These soldiers on a cold, wet, muddy morning with a big army across on the other side of the valley that you really don't want to go and fight would be handed round from their Dutch colleagues these clay bottles full of this strong spirit which would instantly make you braver, stronger, more foolish, and all the things that soldiers should be. And today, it's not really limited to gin, but in English, if you need to have a drink in order to work up the bravery, the strength to, for example, go home and tell your wife that you lost the job or the car or the kids, any drink you have in that circumstance is called Dutch courage. It comes from gin. Gin came over when we got a Dutch king in 1688. And he was Protestant, so he hated Catholics, and in particular, he really hated the French. So out of that grew an English love for gin. He brought over Dutch distillers at the same time as banning all imports of French produce. And then he set the taxation rates on gin, on Geneva, to be really, really low. It was cheaper than beer. So then started the gin craze. I don't know how much you've heard about it. It's a sort of fantastically vivid time in history where for about 20 years, gin was killing more people than London was producing. The death rate in London was higher than the birth rate because of this cheap, nasty, rot-gut spirit. I don't want to go into too much detail, although I think it's really fascinating and do love telling the stories. I will kind of concentrate a little bit on some of the nicknames for gin that were being produced at the time. So, Madame Geneva, you might have heard of. Mother's Ruin, which is still sort of still used in England. Cuckold's Comfort, Cuckold's Delight. King Theodore of Corsica, The Cure for the Blue Devils, The Blue Mountain, white wine, and everybody's favorite, Slappy Bonita. Ooh. So, gin has always had sort of stories and creativity around it. Parliamentary brandy was another one, Nig another one as well. It's, like they were used, those euphemisms, those nicknames, sometimes because actually they made gin illegal. So they just called it something else, parliamentary brandy. And it's a real fuck you to the state. And you can keep drinking gin. But sometimes it's there because it sort of brings into the world stories with it. In the gin craze, not necessarily very good stories. Nowadays, I think, not only do we produce much, much better stuff, but we're able to sort of drink it with a bit more elegance and panache and class and ward off succubi. And, oh, no, you want the succubi, ward off incubi. Where was I? Succubi and incubi?
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Somewhere in there, okay. The gin craze was a horrible time. Awful. Awful. Probably bigger than any modern drug epidemic. Worse than anything that crack cocaine has ever done. Worse than them all. It really brought English society to its knees. And you were probably pretty miserable already if you were poor in London at the time. And this was so cheap, it would really, really it would be there to alleviate misery. Eventually, the government got a hold on it and passed legislation which meant that you had to pay a lot of money. You had to be a big, reputable distiller in order to distill gin. And from the middle of the 18th century, that's when it started to climb up out of the gutter and sort of start to mix with higher society. However, it didn't lose its bad connotations. And one thing I find absolutely fascinating about gin, I think probably most in Britain, but these connotations travel as well, is that on one hand, it is the spirit of utmost sophistication. There is no more sophisticated cocktail, no more elegant, graceful cocktail than the dry martini. In the books, James Bond drank a lot more gin than he ever did in the films. And it has sort of like a royal patronage. On the other hand, though, gin is mother's ruin. Gin destroyed society, and gin, cheap gin, kept being used to do that through the years. So, gin was used, or has connotations of being used in illegal backstreet abortions to drown your sorrows. And in fact, only really in England do people believe that gin makes you depressed when you drink it. It's not true. Unless you think that it is. And you get a bit more drunk, and you're only really drinking gin because you're a bit depressed already. A lot of people think that gin makes them cry. But it's only in England. I've never heard that anywhere else. It's a very interesting psychosomatic thing that you yourself can bring into the drink. So backstreet abortions, misery, poverty, and sophistication. Obviously, as the world of gin gets more sophisticated and more elegant, which is a wonderful thing to see, we're slowly losing those bad connotations. But I like them. I like them because it makes gin a bit more racy and bad. And I think it's good to be bad. On that note, I'm going to pass you over to Joseph.
Thank you, David, for your wonderful words and a little bit of the history of this amazing spirit called gin. Yo voy a seguir con la misma idea, pero me voy a enfocar más acerca de los rituales, ¿no? De los rituales que podemos encontrar en un bar a la hora de llegar a su lugar favorito, ¿no? Cualquiera que sea de ustedes, después de un día largo de trabajo, empiezas un ritual de querer sacar todo este estrés o todo lo que llevas cargando de todo el día, y llegas a tu bar favorito y te pides tal vez un buen dry martini, ¿no? Dicen los que saben que con una botella de vermut te debe de durar toda la vida, ¿no? Un buen dry martini sentado en el bar, te empiezas a sacar muchas otras cosas y es cuando realmente tu ritual empieza, ¿no? Y empiezas desde que eliges a qué lugar visitar, ¿no? Si me preguntan a mí cuál es mi lugar favorito para llegar a tomar un martini y desestresarme, combatiría mucho entre Limanturi y Artemisia, ¿no? Que son bares locales para poder relajarte y tomar un martini. Cuando empieza tu ritual y llegas al bar, te sientas, eliges lo que quieres tomar, ¿no? Eliges la marca, eliges el espíritu que quieras hacer, y te sientas y empiezas a generar esta expulsión de cargas, de energía. Hay una historia muy padre acerca de cómo vas terminando tu martini. Se supone que empiezas lleno de presiones, lleno de cosas, de estrés que tienes, y justo cuando terminas de darle el último sorbo al martini, todo desaparece, ¿no? Todo ese estrés se va y empiezas con el siguiente ritual, que el siguiente ritual es seguir avanzando la noche y tal vez puedas cambiar de un martini a un gin and tonic, ¿no? I would like to ask you guys, which is your favorite, probably bar in the world? What is your favorite cocktail? And tell me a little bit of your rituals when you arrive to these bars. Just like a quick flash of it.
That's an incredibly hard question because
I know it is.
there are a lot of really good bars around the world, and I'm very, very lucky to be able to visit a lot of them. So just for an arbitrary choice, I'm going to go with an incredible bar, Nottingham Forest in Milano, which is tiny and full of stuff and quite insane, quite brilliantly mad. And I've never had the same drink twice there. And the drinks come with, sometimes they come with a surgical scalpel and a kind of membrane that you have to cut, and this dark red, salty, sweet liquid that's a bit like blood, and a rubber glove you have to wear. And it's... So I can't pick one cocktail.
Fair
but
enough.
Going into the bar and watching the preparation of something which I don't understand, and which involves sort of, it's just a few things on a tray, or is done with a humor and a lightness that these objects bring me into very strange places of imagination, and before you even start drinking, and it's wonderful.
Well, thank you, David. How about you, Jimmy? What would you say?
I had all of David's answer to think of my favorite bar and favorite
I
cocktail.
know. What's a rough question, but...
Yeah. Goodness. I mean, shit, man. My favorite cocktail is the one that's in my hand anywhere. I already talked about EO. I love that place. It's hallowed ground for me. I'll say probably my favorite bartender to watch. He doesn't have a bar right now, but he's opening one. There's a New York bartender from Japan. His name is Kenta Goto. And he was the head bartender at the Pegu Club on West Houston. or West Broadway in Houston. This is one of the first bars to really embrace the gin category. Audrey was, her nickname is the libation goddess, and she loves gin. Kenta was the head bartender there for many years, and I talked about the point, and that was always Kenta's station. And the expression of craftsmanship and elegance and utter attention to detail and the customer's needs, I was entirely in his hands every time I stepped into that bar when he was tending. It was nothing short of magnificent, and I get chill bumps even thinking about how he looked after not just me. I felt like I was the only person in the room, and he was 3 deep. He was giving the same excellent quality of service to every single person in that bar, and that is probably the most standout thing for me. An Alaska cocktail I had there for the first time. It wasn't him that made it, though. That is probably my favorite cocktail. It sort of takes the elegance, the magic of and the simplicity of the lightning bolt that's a dry martini and pumps it up a little bit. It's stirred cocktail, gin, yellow chartreuse, I prefer a dash of orange bitters. Gary's bitters are great in there. But that's a drink that I almost have to order every time I go to the Pegu. And it's a slippery slope. There's a lot going on in that drink. So it generally makes for a rather short visit. Yeah. But, that's the first thing that popped in my mind.
Thank you, Jimmy. ¿Por qué toco el tema de los rituales, ¿no? Ahorita ya pasamos un poco por los botánicos y hemos estado agarrando bastante información, y me gustaría como enrollarle un poco y hablar ya de un poco sobre cómo el ritual de hacer una bebida espirituosa, hacer ginebra, es totalmente no diferente, pero es más mágica. Es una manera de producir muy mágica debido a toda la magia que vienen con los botánicos, ¿no? Específicamente con Hendrick tenemos los 11 botánicos que ya tocamos, y bueno, tenemos un proceso súper diferente porque usamos 2 diferentes tipos de alambique. El ritual que tiene Leslie, la planta de Hendrick no es más grande que este cuarto, yo diría que es la mitad. Estos 2 alambiques están todo el tiempo, y Leslie anda con sus 11 botánicos que tiene cajones, y ella todo el tiempo los está refiliando y los junta y hace una destilación totalmente diferente debido a los alambiques. Hendrick es el resultado de 11 diferentes botánicos, de mucha magia. Thank you, sir. Y bueno, es una ginebra totalmente, diría yo, enfocado hacia lo fresco. Me atrevo a decir que es de las ginebras más frescas que he probado, ¿no? Yo no me quiero meter mucho en el tema de la producción de Hendrick, sino más bien como en la magia y todo lo que pueda haber alrededor de hacer esta bebida espirituosa que es ginebra, ¿no? David, would you like to tell us what's on your drink?
The drink we have now was made for me by another contender for my favorite bar in the world, which is Happiness Forgets in London, which is tiny again and incredibly welcoming. And the bartender there made me this. It's a variation on a cocktail they normally make with whiskey. So you just swap the whiskey out for Hendrick's gin, and it works very, very well. They call it a blackbird, but it's a gin blackbird from Happiness Forgets, from James Goggin, that I had when I was there on a date with a girl that I met at the Bad Sex Awards, who's still in my phone as Fiona Bad Sex Awards.
The what?
It's a literary prize for the worst sex writing in the world. It's brilliant. We sponsor it very proudly. And this has Hendrick's gin, a rose liqueur called Rose Without Thorns, made by Van Vies, who are a Dutch company, some Amontillado sherry, and some lemon juice. And that's it.
Thank you. It's delicious.
And try not to think of bad sex while you drink it.
Cheers. David, do you want to should we start the closure of the... Ok, vamos únicamente, David, vamos a cerrar todo el seminario ahora. 5 minutos más vamos a generar toda esta información y darle un sentido diferente. Would you like to do the honors, sir? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Joseph. So as Joseph was explaining about ritual, I firmly believe that although we must always look forwards, there are many things from our past that we're missing now. And one of the things we're missing is more rituals. And I think rituals are incredibly important. They can focus your mind on a very specific thing, and they can kind of give you powers, take you into places which you wouldn't normally otherwise get. And rituals can be tiny and very short, but if they're a repeated action, if they're personal to you, or they're personal to the way you do things, I think they can still have great power. So I like to think of this sort of what we've done here as sort of a little bit of an outside space, trying to take your minds to some quite silly places. So I would just now like to close this ceremony, this ritual, and keep you all protected from the bad spirits out there, and make sure you enjoy the good spirits in here. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming and spending a nice hour and a half with us this afternoon. Just a reminder, we just want to encourage everyone to step on out and buy the rare and awesome stuff that Bittersling and the La Europea are selling outside. Again, have a great, wonderful...
Do we have time for questions?
We have like 7 minutes, technically. So if you have one, raise your hand, and we'll use Joseph as our translator, yeah, if it's in Spanish. I have a question for David, actually. Tell me about these photos. Just to call the pink elephant out in the room. Do tell. I'm curious, because I've heard this, but it always fascinates me when I hear about it.
There's no particular story to these photos. It's just, I guess, a little bit how my brain works. I respond to lots and lots and lots of different images. They don't necessarily have to mean anything, but they're there. And the power of each image takes your brain into a slightly different place each time. And I think it sort of helps visually stretch your brain and exercise your brain. And I mean, I also think that you can do similar things with words. It is a little bit more difficult here because we've got people in a funny box at the back translating us. Thank you, translators. I don't know if anybody's using the service, but I'm sure it's been very, very accurate. Cucumber.
A few minutes. Here's one over here.
Okay.
I think it's focus most on the American gins. I believe it is.
Sure, yeah. So in the States, local craft distillation is a glorious epidemic. It's to be encouraged. Many are making gins while they're resting their whiskeys because they have bills to pay. As far as the category growth, to be perfectly honest, I'm just thrilled people are talking about it again. When I started 6.5 years ago on Hendrick's, it was just me and a couple other guys that had jobs on gin brands, and we were just kind of talking to ourselves about it, really. And now people are listening. It's exciting. There's no better time to work in this category than now. I think a lot will change in the coming years. It's a white-hot spirit. This is purely coming from the U.S. We have a competitive set of over 270 gins out there that are locally produced. And, from a strategy perspective, who you going after? It's not the big boys, really, with Hendrick's Gin, because we are, to be perfectly honest, we are blazing the path. But it's every single little city's own little proud little child, gin child, that they're happy about. So encourage and education is really, I think, where we as a category can really excel. Time will tell, really. But it's, like I said, there's no better time than now, honestly. Yeah. And, are there gins made in Mexico now?
No, there are not gins made in. Well, there are a few, but they're not like they don't have like a good. They're not made in a good way. What is happening in Mexico, and I've been seeing it a lot. They're doing a mezcal with botanicals, and they're doing like a mezcal gin style.
The number 9 is one
yeah,
we see.
Pier de Almas, and I saw another brand doing that, which is very interesting. As a gin point of view, it could be a gin really weird, but as a mezcal point of view, it's like something very special, I think.
Yeah, I've tried it. It's quite special. That Pier de Almas, but it's small. I mean, that's not something that you're not gonna see it everywhere all the time. I hope that helps. I don't know if that's sort of. Yeah, it's a fun place to be,
Any other questions, guys? No? Louis?
I'll let you feel this one, David.
Boom shakalak, me rufli te pom pom, sleepy floopy. When we ride down the hole, certainly.
And with that, I think we'll bid you adieu. Thank you very much. Gracias, muchas gracias.
Guys, one more thing before we leave. I think there was a change on the venue of Por Qué Mezcal. So now it's a 10-minute walk. So just for you to know. Thank you. Tacuba número 12. That's the street and the number. Tacuba 12, 10-minute walk.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for everything.